This lesson is going to be looking at how blood clots form and why they're important in the body. These are the key words for today's lesson. We're going to be looking at the terms blood clot, thrombus, blood clotting or coagulation, clotting factors, fibrin, platelets or thrombocytes, serum and vasoconstriction. The learning objective for this lesson is pretty broad. We have to describe the series of steps involved in the formation of a blood clot. So bear in mind that this can be broken down into learning objectives if that helps you to learn. Please make sure that you read pages 107 to 108 of your textbook and complete the notes on page 22 of your class booklet. So blood clotting has an important function in the body. It is there to minimize blood loss, and secondary function, but also just as important, is it will prevent pathogens from entering the body. How blood clotting occurs is through three steps. The first one, vasoconstriction. So remembering from our lesson on blood vessels, this is when the arteries or arterioles start to narrow in diameter. This will reduce blood flow at any given point. The formation of a platelet plug, and then coagulation. So if we start by looking at vasoconstriction itself. Vasoconstriction, as we've just established, is narrowing of a blood vessel, and it's the smooth muscle wall that allows this vasoconstriction to occur. The point of this, as we've discussed already, is to decrease blood flow and hence decrease blood loss from that injury site. So if we are reducing the volume passing by this injury site, we're reducing the volume of blood that can escape. Next stage is when we look at the formation of a platelet plug. So blood vessel walls are normally quite smooth because they're lined with that endothelial tissue, so that's a type of epithelium. However, when there is some sort of mechanical damage, as you can see here, it starts to become quite rough on the inside. The thrombocytes or platelets will actually start to stick to that rough surface, and they will start to release chemicals that will attract other thrombocytes or platelets, and eventually you will have a plug forming. Now this plug will plug that gap, and it will prevent any further blood from escaping from the injured blood vessel, and hence you will slow down blood loss. The platelets will also produce another set of chemicals that will promote vasoconstriction over a longer period of time. So again, not only are we plugging the injury site, we're also reducing that blood flow to the damaged vessel by vasoconstriction. Third thing we're going to be looking at is coagulation. Now in this electron micrograph, what you're actually seeing are erythrocytes or red blood cells, and they are tangled up in this mesh of fibers. Now coagulation occurs when you have more serious injuries, so when it's a large vessel that's damaged, or multiple vessels are damaged, resulting in quite significant blood loss. So in order to prevent that from happening, the blood clotting process will occur, and we will start to produce a number of clotting factors. Some of those clotting factors result in the formation of fibrin. That's this mesh that you can see in the picture here. Now fibrin is insoluble, so it won't dissolve in that plasma, and it is made up of thread-like proteins, and as you can see really clearly here, it's forming a mesh to trap these red blood cells and platelets to slow down blood flow and create that coagulation effect or blood clot. Now when you have this mesh plus all the trapped material in it, as I've shown here, then you will end up with a blood clot happening or a thrombus. Now, just to distinguish between a blood clot and a thrombus, A thrombus is a blood clot that forms inside of a blood vessel. Okay, so when you get a clot forming on the outside, eventually it will solidify and form a scab. Thrombus or thrombus formation can be a little bit dangerous because if that loosens off from the inside of a blood vessel, it can then travel until it hits a narrower blood vessel, for example in the brain or near the heart, and that can result in a heart attack or stroke. Right, so just a quick summary of what we've talked about so far. We are looking at how a blood clot forms. So the first thing that's happened is we've got some sort of mechanical damage at a blood vessel. This results in blood loss, and this process will result in clotting factors being triggered. Eventually, we will go through a series of stages as outlined here, and we will form a substance called fibrin. Now, I'm showing you this diagram to illustrate that there are other stages, but you don't need to know what they are. All we need to know is that when the blood vessel is damaged, we produce clotting factors, and through a series of reactions we form fibrin. But in order to get there, we need to make sure that we are reducing blood loss. So again, this is done through the formation of a platelet plug and also through vasoconstriction, which is shown by this blood vessel narrowing here at the injury site. So the platelet plug will be formed because the thrombocytes or platelets start to adhere to that rough surface that's being created on the inside of the epithelium lining. You also get erythrocytes or blood cells starting to stick and form that plug, while the vasodilation will reduce blood flow by narrowing the diameter. As this is happening, fibrin is being formed, and it creates a mesh that traps all these red blood cells and platelets in place, and it forms an insoluble blood clot. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be looking at is the clot reaction. Now, a clot reaction is actually a slower process and occurs after the formation of the clot. So this is the clot here, and the clot reaction happens afterwards. So you'll know from getting a small cut on your finger that at the time the wound looks like it's open and it's quite sore, and you can see the red underneath the layers of the dermis or skin. Eventually, over time, what starts to happen is you can see the skin actually pulling itself together on either side. Now, what's actually happening is those insoluble fibrin threads start to contract, and they become stronger and thicker or more dense, and the effect of that is it pulls the skin together and kind of knits it back together. While that's happening, some fluid leaves that clot site, and that fluid is called serum. So this is part of the liquid that bathes your tissues, and it is squeezed out of this clot site, and it forms this dry tissue called a scab. And this scab actually prevents any pathogens from entering into your bloodstream and causing you any further infection. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. This is a summary of what we've talked about so far. We know that blood clots are formed to prevent blood loss or to limit the amount of blood loss, and also to prevent any pathogens, disease or causing organisms from getting into the body. A damaged blood vessel will vasoconstrict, that is to say that the blood vessel will start to become narrower. The point of this is to reduce blood flow at that site and hence reduce blood loss. Platelets or thrombocytes will stick to the rough surface as shown in the animation, and this will start to form a plug. Platelets will produce further chemicals to prolong that vasoconstriction, so not only are we physically plugging this gap, we are also continuing to narrow the blood vessel to reduce blood flow. For more serious injuries, we will have coagulation occurring. And in that process, fibrin is produced and it acts like a mesh which will trap those platelets, forming a clot. Now, fibrin will hold that clot in place by forming that mesh network, and it will also not only prevent extra blood loss, but it will also prevent pathogens from entering the body, causing disease or infection. In a clot reaction, the process will occur more slowly, hence why a clot forms first. But in the clot reaction, serum is removed from that injury site, a scab will form, and we will end up with a solid plug forming over that injury site. Okay, just as a reminder, please make sure that you read over those pages in your textbook, that's page 107 and 108, and complete the notes on page 22.